was something about it that made her stop and draw a breath. They saw bones, but they saw more than that. They saw a tracksuit bottom. And then they saw a jawbone, and they realised that this was human remains they were looking at.
Next we pulled up a mask, and there was no eyes in it, and there was just a zip across the mouth. That was the second one we found.
Garda James O'Donoghue put his hand into the murky waters in the silt and so on. In there, he found a fob from a supermarket.
They gave him the name and the address of the fob owner. It was Elaine O'Hara from Bellarmine Apartments, Stepaside, Dublin.
There was some connection between this crime scene and the one at Killikee where Elaine was found.
For a woman who'd been missing for 13 months, suddenly everything happened at the same time by just sheer coincidence.
When they pulled back the sheet, there was stab marks on the mattress, but there was also blood stains on it. And while that mattress was there a year previous when she went missing, nobody had pulled back the sheet. The evidence had sat there for a year, all the while Elaine's body was decomposing in the Dublin mountains.
The investigation had very much reopened and was now an active homicide investigation.
Gardaí and Blackrock are appealing to the public for information in what is now a murder inquiry into the death of Elaine O'Hara. Ms O'Hara's remains were found in a forest close to Killikee, Dublin, just over a week ago. Detectives say
When Elaine O'Hara went missing in August of 2012, there would have been a little bit of media coverage. This was a missing person, but it would have fizzled away. Gardaí take missing person investigations very seriously, but clearly they wouldn't put the same resources into it as they would a murder investigation.
Now they found out that she had met a very different end in the mountains, brought there, it appeared, by someone else and brutally killed.
This was now clearly a murder investigation. It used and squeezed every drop out of the Garda resources, in the sense that every aspect, every arm of Gardaí seemed to be used. But it was the old school techniques that produced, in the initial stages, that produced some of the most significant pieces of evidence.
Gardaí launched an extensive search of the surrounding areas after these things were uncovered and Elaine's remains were found. They put up the Coast Guard helicopter for 2 days. There was an extensive search of the parks and the surrounding areas.
Killikee is an area of outstanding natural beauty that's really popular with Dubliners who want to go on picnics, bike rides, see some of the spectacular landscapes, get some clean air in their lungs. They found hacksaw blades, fishing line, bulldog clips, cable ties, harness equipment, bondage gear. It became clear that something much graver, much darker had been happening in that forest than would be usual. The media were aware that human remains had been found. Gardaí held a press conference when they established the identity. There were appeals for information from the public. Old school police techniques. They were using the media to get their messages out there. And they did get an awful lot of leads. And one of them in particular, a woman called Edna Lillis. This was a woman that she had met some years previously. They were both inpatients in the psychiatric unit that Elaine O'Hara was admitted to. on a number of occasions throughout her life. She said that they became quite friendly, and she confided in her about a relationship that she was having with a married man. She said that this man liked to cut her while they were having sex, and Edna remembered telling her that this was a dangerous game. She advised her to get out of it.
Elaine had confided in a nurse called Rosetta Callan that an individual was hurting her. He was demanding that she take part in bondage games. There was violence, sexual violence, and that Elaine was very afraid and intimated that she didn't want these games to continue. Rosetta, obviously bound by patient confidentiality, was very, very concerned about Elaine's welfare, and she asked Elaine to go to the police. Elaine refused. She said that this individual was married with kids, and she was fearful that the kids would somehow get hurt, that the exposure of this individual, their father, was going to be damaging to the children, and that sums up a lot about Elaine's mindset.
She'd also mentioned that she was trying to end this relationship many times. She felt very vulnerable and controlled by him. They also discussed images that she might have shown them on her iPhone. She had images of whips and chains and handcuffs.
One piece of advice that Edna Lillis gave to her friend Elaine O'Hara: take a record, take a note of everything that happened between them. That piece of advice was to prove crucial in the murder investigation. An awful lot of CCTV was harvested from 10 cameras around the Bellarmine apartment complex, which is in Stepaside on the foothill of the Dublin Mountains. A number of cameras looking at entrance and exit points were examined. There was a camera outside where the elevator was that was also examined by a team of 11 Gardaí.
They would watch hundreds of hours of people going about their daily jobs, people that live there, visitors, postal workers, delivery drivers, guests, walking in and out of the building. Much of it was unremarkable, but 7 o'clock one evening, a guy walked into that building, and that's when a flicker in that investigative team really went off. This was a guy who positioned himself so you deliberately couldn't see his face on CCTV camera footage. And when he went to dial up the lift, he put his hand over the button so you couldn't see which floor he was going to.
They uncovered a significant amount of CCTV footage, and they were able to identify him in 10 clips on dates between January and August of 2012. Having pinpointed this man on the footage, they now were trying to break down what information they had. He was clearly trying to hide his identity from the cameras. But there were some points that they could pick up on. They could try and gauge his height, his stature, his general build, and identifying features that could lead to a match. They were able to utilise the different cameras from around the apartment complex. So they weren't just looking for a man, they were looking to see, well, was there a car that he'd arrived in? Could they find an identifying number plate or some other key clue that would help in their investigation? Forensic teams carried out an analysis of Elaine O'Hara's mattress. They found 5 patches of blood and semen, and they were able to establish that it was Elaine O'Hara's blood, and that it was the semen of one unidentified male.
The police's investigation cranked up another gear. They fine-tooth combed all of Elaine's digital history. They did a forensic examination on all of the laptops and phones that they'd already had in their possession. They found a lot of troubling material. They found Elaine pictured clothed and unclothed, being abused for BDSM purposes with scars on her body, pictures of mutilated bodies, a map to Killer Key, where her body had been found. They also found a folder of naked, abused and murdered women. It was clear that Elaine was involved in something much darker, much more terrible than they'd ever previously imagined.
The digital analysis involved in this case was an absolutely mammoth chore. I think there were 5 mobile phones, there were a vast number of laptops, and much of the information, had been deleted, but it was retrieved using forensic software.
And some of the things that were found in Elaine O'Hara's laptop, I suppose, revealed this kind of hidden part of her life, this BDSM life.
BDSM is a wide variety of practices that largely relate to the giving up of control or the use of pain to heighten sexual pleasure. So bondage, domination, sadomasochism are ways of exploring human sexuality, which range from the kind of relatively mundane. So if anyone who has ever spanked their partner, they've taken part in BDSM practices, through to much more structured relationships between people. And it's like any other fetish, it's a way of exploring and expressing sexual interests.
The police found a certain amount of self-written erotica by Elaine, and these tended to focus in on her fantasies, BDSM fantasies, but more about being kidnapped and constrained. This was a repeat theme that went through her sexual desire and her sexual fantasy life.
There was an outline of slave agreement, a full contract for slavery.
Contracts are spoken about a lot. They've appeared in a lot of media, and it seems to be one of the more sort of prominent ideas about BDSM. It seems to be used as a quick way to set up the dynamic. If you force someone to sign a piece of paper saying that they're going to spend all weekend on their knees or something, that's a very quick way to get someone into that headspace, which BDSM is about a lot. It's getting someone into a certain frame of mind and feeling a certain way. But I perhaps have come across 4 or 5 contracts in my life. They are, of course, not legally binding. It's more of a theatre prop, and it certainly isn't very common.
There was a document called Gorian Woman, Woman's Right is Slave. It was misogynistic. A woman had to be slave to a man.
So the Gorian lifestyle, it's certainly not a healthy depiction of being a slave. Obviously, being a slave and having a strict protocol relationship is very appealing to some people, but it felt very misogynistic and very written from the point of how best to demean and control a woman, but not in the consensual, agreed-on way. And so it's not widely practiced from what I've heard of. I've been in the industry for a long, long time now, and it's very rare.
They found this PDF on serial killers, and there was also this emphasis on piquerism, and that comes from the French word of piquer, to prick, and this is essentially a sexual paraphilia based on any obsession with puncturing the skin, whether it be with a needle or a knife, and it can be obviously taken to extreme levels.
As they searched the devices, they found even more disturbing information on Elaine O'Hara's laptops.
There were BDSM videos, there were pictures of Elaine clothed and naked with scars. There were pictures of mutilated women. There was a folder called Killing with pictures of dead women.
Detectives also discovered in the download folder a folder entitled Read This. Some very disturbing things were discovered here. The documents described weapons of torture and how to kill and murder people.
Elaine documented her emotional state in a diary, and this, of course, helped the guards to piece together a lot of her lifestyle and also her mental state. She had written quite a bit that she was self-harming, that she was cutting herself, that she was very depressed, and that she felt in so much pain. She had kind of a fractured way of thinking, and she was just deeply struggling on an emotional level, and this really did help paint a picture of the emotional state that she was in.
The scene appeals to a lot of people similar to Elaine who have suffered mental health problems or physical health problems, or have always felt like maybe they don't quite belong, and here you have a room full of people who are similar. And given the heightened nature of sex and the relationship and the dynamic and the physicality of fetish, when you're somebody who might be medicated or has, chemical imbalance going on in your brain, you need those things to be higher. You want to love harder and feel harder so that you can hit a similar level that it feels like the other people around you are already at. A lot of my submissives express that they feel like they don't have as much joy in their lives as everyone else does. And of course, it turns out that we're all pretty much on the same page with it.
We often think about these kind of sexual fantasies and sexual practices as a way of escaping from the everyday situation and as a way of coping with other stresses. So we have a woman wanting to behave in submissive behaviour as a way of kind of taking control of that powerlessness and saying, well, this is what I want to happen, but I can set limits on it, I can put boundaries in, I can stop this whenever I want in this sexual realm, which might not be what people can do in the rest of their lives. Having decided to explore those, or having decided that she needed to explore those, we have a woman who doesn't have the social contacts in which to kind of enter that scene through other people, so who doesn't maybe have the confidence or the social ability to make the decision to find a club or find a meet where she can explore those ideas and talk to others about it. So she really dives in to kind of the immediate sexual performance side of this, in joining sites which are effectively social media dating sites for this community.
She had 3 different profiles on a fetish website. One was sub or slave for you, one was submissive, one was help me learn. One of her profiles had been viewed 10,000 times.
The detectives believed that Elaine could have met her mystery man as early as 2007. So they started to chart back who she'd met on websites and online.
She first went on these websites in 06, 07, and she didn't know an awful lot about that world. She was eager to learn, though. She wanted to find a master that would teach her the way.
Gardaí interviewed 8 men who Elaine had contact with from various fetish sites. Their contact details were stored on her devices, and from there they were able to establish that only 2 of the men had met up with Elaine, and when they checked out their alibis they were able to eliminate them from the inquiry. The 2 men also gave evidence that the sort of stuff that Elaine was into, the kind of bondage and fetish interests, were just too extreme for their taste.
Elaine was quite new to the scene, and that does mean that your ideas and your experience of what a relationship like this entails can be not fully developed yet. When you don't have any idea of what something is, and someone comes to you and says, well, this is what it is, you might be likely to believe them.
For her to get involved and drawn into that scene was always going to create difficulties because she did not have the psychological template to cope with it. In other words, she was almost like a child going into this dark world, and it is a dark sexual world. A dark sexual world that can be handled by people who have the right psychological framework. But if you don't have that, you get dragged in by somebody occasionally who does have the wherewithal and who can abuse and use you within that particular area of sexuality. She was absolutely open. In psychology, we sometimes say she was biddable. She had a cognitive distortion of herself, and anyone who wanted to get in and abuse that vulnerability was capable of so doing at any time, in my view.
The police made a huge discovery. They found that her iPhone had been backing up to her computer. This meant they could check all her phone records, they could see her data, they could piece together her movements and her communications in a way that they probably couldn't have dreamt of. They found thousands of text messages. About 2,500 of those were with somebody called David. At this stage of the investigation, from looking at the texts, David became a prime suspect. In fact, Gardaí began to build up a picture of him, which led them to believe he was a sociopath.
From all the evidence that the police had garnered, they now had a prime suspect, and his name was, quotes, David.
She had had a BDSM relationship previously with this person, but that she herself had brought it to an end in 2008. She wanted to take a break from it. But this was, I suppose, an attempt to rekindle the BDSM relationship that they had, and it was a successful attempt.
They arranged to meet the next day, and at one point he said to her, "Do you ever think about me? Do you ever miss me?" And she said honestly that she did think about him, but then she had to remember all the blood.
She was a submissive. She was looking for a dominating master. She wanted to be chained, gagged, bound, things like that. She wanted somebody else to have that control. That was how she got her sexual thrills. But she did not like blood. She did not like to be stabbed, and that was something that the person who reached out to her in 2011 did enjoy doing.
The term bloodlust was coined for this individual because he sent messages saying, "I wish I'd kept a clip of that stabbing, all of that blood." The appearance of blood, the smell of blood, the texture of blood, the sight of it is incredibly thrilling and erotic to them. But this is a human being that we're talking about. So the sight of all that blood, that's somebody suffering.
He mentioned there was a woman in the US he was going to stab, but that was too expensive. He couldn't afford to go to the US. And he said he couldn't wait to put his knife in flesh and see blood pour. And Elaine's response to that was, "You're going to have to wait, sir. You're not going to do it to me, never again."
She said repeatedly in those messages that she didn't want to be stabbed. She really wanted to move away from that. He appeared to be trying to normalise it. At one stage she said, "No, I'm scared of you. I don't want to be stabbed. I don't like it anymore." In the same conversation she revealed that she was short of money and that she was living on beans on toast. His response was to suggest that he paid her to allow him to stab her. She said, "No, I don't want that." She said, "When you come near me, I'm afraid. Forget it," she said.
He then texted her about this dream that he had where this woman was lying naked in Elaine's apartment and she was chained up and gagged And he told her that this was a nice dream, but Elaine kept saying it's not going to happen. She was constantly trying to remove this stabbing from the dreams and the references and text messages that he was sending her.
She didn't want knife play, but a knife was soon reintroduced back into the relationship, and he was again stabbing her and back in total control.
When they got back in touch, it goes from 0 to 100 pretty fast. And it's not uncommon to see that, I think, in any domestic abuse, which is what this was abuse. It's not uncommon to see that at all, is there almost becomes this sort of trick loop in the victim's brain, and they can't, help themselves when the abuser comes back in. And again, when you add a manipulative, controlling psychopath and someone who is not in the best frame of mind at the time, although doing a bit better and is saying, I don't want that, I don't want this. It's a testament to how much he'd managed to wear her down to get her anywhere near him again. Because she comes in swinging into that conversation saying, I don't want that. And very quickly it's back to how it was.
He kept making out that she loved it because it made him happy. And yes, she did want to make him happy, but she didn't want to be stabbed.
It's chilling, and it's chilling, I think, because he doesn't see the other person as a person. He sees it as the thing that is going to receive the blade that meets his need for power. And so he's not engaging in a sexual relationship with somebody else which has these elements of BDSM practice. He's engaging in an absolute exercise of power where what he wants is control over life and death. And some of the later texts that he sends makes that very explicit. So he says things like, every time I stab you or strangle you, I want you to think you're going to die. And when you don't die, I want you to be grateful that I have allowed you your life. This isn't an expression about sexual power. This is an expression of what he's literally getting off on, is the ability to have the power to end somebody's life.
Elaine had a history of self-harm, which again I've experienced throughout my career. And to read about how he sort of reintroduced cutting to her via his fetish is a remarkably calculated, cruel thing to do. To think that he was leaving marks on her body that she would have had there before, and then giving her a similar physical sensation as she would have given herself when she was feeling that way. That again is not a fetish, that is not a kink. That is using someone's trauma and someone's pain as a weapon.
This is an alternate world, and one that the police could not be expected to have an intimate knowledge of. So you're getting messages about stabbing and bondage and some very extreme stuff. How can you possibly know what's real, what's fantasy? Is this just for titillation? Is there a grain of something more serious in it?
Gardaí understandably called in experts in the BDSM world to explain to them what certain terminology meant, what the lifestyle entailed, and what were the various fetishes.
He's not so much saying, I want to kill you, but he's reminding her that she tried to kill herself. This is the beginning of when he starts to tell her that he's doing her a favor. It's you who wants this. It's you who are asking for this. I don't want it, but what you've done now is you've unleashed the animal in me, and that's your fault.
This blaming for awakening a desire and then putting it on her shoulders to fulfill it is possibly one of the most obscene things I've ever encountered throughout my career in the fetish industry, because it's literally using her mental health history as some sort of bargaining chip, as some sort of power over her. And just because at one point in time she might have been suffering to the point of feeling that way about her life, that is not his call. It's nobody's call to make or to exploit or to play with. And it's mind-boggling to me that anybody could use that against a submissive.
Between March 2011 and April 2012, he sent her a barrage of messages, and they were all designed to really undermine her self-confidence and feelings of self-worth. So he criticised her appearance. She was clear in saying that she wanted love from him, but he told her that she was old and fat, she was a smoker, she was disobedient and needy.
He was cruel, very cruel to her in those text messages that were sent after he resumed contact in 2011. He mocked her, he offended her when she told him that she wanted to meet somebody, that she wanted to start a family one day. She wanted a child more than anything in the world. She loved children. That was the profession that she wanted to be in. Her mother was a teacher. She wanted to be a teacher. She was studying to be a Montessori teacher. And cruelly, he said that he would give her the child that she craved if he gave her what he craved. And that for me was the most despicable thing that emerged during those text messages. He knew exactly how to reel her in.
He then says, effectively, only I have the power because I'm the only one who's interested in you, because you are all these negative things. But I have the power to give you the thing that you think will give you self-worth and give you, effectively, unconditional love, which I think is really what she's looking for, is unconditional acceptance and unconditional love.
She tried time and time again to wriggle away from his advances, and he reined her in time and time again. He would give her a child. He said he would have nothing to do with the child. He wouldn't acknowledge it. He wouldn't care for it. He wouldn't bring it up. He said that he would give her that child, but she had to bring somebody to him that he could take that person's life. A life for a life was how he so wickedly described it.
He also had this idea of the pair of them going off to view a house together, to pose as a couple and to organise the whole thing under fake names and fake phone numbers. He had also chosen this female auctioneer, completely oblivious to the whole situation, that she was being put in the frame for this sadistic idea and fantasy that he had. And he had this woman's name and address and phone number. And the idea was to go and view a house in a remote location, to pretend that they were a couple together and that they were going to put a hood over this woman, tie her up, stab her, cut her throat, and then go back to Elaine's where he was going to knock her up.
He sent a message saying nobody had ever been caught for Rayneth Murray's murder or the homeless woman Eugenia Bratis in the Phoenix Park. Gardaí then started to look at whether he was a serial killer. He was clearly homicidal and wasn't just interested in stabbing, but in murder.
It was an incredibly difficult time for the police, and what they had was essentially two people fantasising with each other. And it's difficult to know what is fantasy and what is potentially real. But they also had a dead body. Somewhere, something along the line has gone very, very horribly wrong. And somewhere the lines between fantasy and reality have become fatally blurred.
Now, the detectives are looking for what could be a serial killer.
Police needed to find where the phone was purchased. They knew that would yield information.
So the phone was bought in 2011 in a phone store on Grafton Street. Whoever bought this phone then texted Elaine O'Hara
2 hours later.
That phone was the phone that David had used to call Elaine. It had been bought with a €40 top-up voucher, and the only number that phone had ever called was Elaine. They found the name registered to it was an unusual one, Garoon Casehome. There was a date of birth of the person, 1992. The phone was registered to an address in Tipperary.
Predominantly the conversation was in relation to their BDSM relationship, but there were times and little nuggets of information that whoever was sending these text messages from the Garoon Casehome phone revealed, and those particular details would prove crucial in the Garda investigation, crucial in revealing who this mystery man was. It essentially gave them the leads that they needed to find their suspect.
Police knew it was an unusual name, Garoon Casehome. They tried different permutations of that. They tried Gordon, they tried Chisholm, but no one relevant to the inquiry. They also looked at the address, Oak Lawn. They found that it was an Oak Park in Tipperary, but that the Garoon phone had been nowhere near that address.
By analysing Garoon's phone, they were able to get a sense of where he moved, what locations he was in at certain times when he sent various messages and so on. And from that, they could then download CCTV from those locations and see if they could find the suspect.
They'd seen the phone had been used in Bagot Street area, in the Foxrock area. It pinged off masts all the time in those areas. So the police felt it was highly likely that the owner of the phone lived and worked in South County Dublin.
Detectives were soon able to build up a picture of this man. He had a key to her apartment, so they could square when he came in with the CCTV of the building's security. They saw the man a few times, but they got a huge breakthrough when they saw him entering the apartment complex with Elaine.
The police have now inextricably linked the mystery man who behaves so suspiciously whenever he arrives at Elaine's address with the phone they discovered and all of the horrific information that it contained. Critically, they can't quite make out his face on the CCTV camera. They're that close from revealing this mask of the psychopath, but he's always constantly just out of reach.
He sent a very unusual text in May 2011. He said he'd seen the carcass of a sheep, a dead sheep, near his flying club. He said he couldn't wait to sink his knife into it after dark. He sent a subsequent text in which he said that he'd done that and the blood had spurted out and he felt so happy. And he ended that text with a kiss.
The guards never found a carcass, but he mentioned it again in another text when he said he saw it when he was out flying.
He'd mentioned flying in a few text messages by this stage, so the police started to look for registered pilots in Ireland. They particularly looked for ones in the South County Dublin area because that's where the phone was registered. They came up with nothing.
This man in his texts had given specific dates as to when he flew, and more particularly, when he came 5th in the airplane competition.
This was very specific, and that was a detail that Gardaí were able to cross-reference. Now, they were initially a little off the mark because they were looking at actual flying competitions. They were also looking at fishing competitions, fly fishing, things like that. But one of the Gardaí, cleverly and correctly, just remarked during a brainstorming session in the incident room, said,
he was walking in the Dublin Mountains, and he noticed one of these model aircraft flying clubs practicing and competing, and he just wondered if maybe that was it. So they looked into competitions that were held in the area around the weekend where this person, this Garoon Case Home phone, had sent Elaine the text about finishing 5th in the competition, and they looked up the competition, and lo and behold, a person called Graham Dwyer had finished 5th in that particular flying competition.
The name rang a bell, obviously, when the guards were going through Elaine's apartment. There was an entry on the 13th of June 2011 where it mentioned Graham Dwyer, and they cross-referenced that with his phone number that was found in a telephone book as well. The contact number given when they were registering the Garoon phone was the exact same as Graham's, except it was 086 and not 087.
Once they had the name Graham Dwyer, they ran it through Pulse, the Garda computer system. It came up with a couple of hits. The first was that he'd reported a bike missing from his architect's firm in Bagot Street, so they knew where he worked. It also came up with his home address in Foxrock, Dublin. It was a huge coincidence. The fact that the phone had pinged off areas where Graham Dwyer lived and worked was too much of a coincidence for them to overlook.
Picture of Graham Dwyer was a very close match to the mystery man that they saw on CCTV footage at Elaine O'Hara's apartment block. Graham's sister's address, 4 Oak Lawn, Clarehan, was extremely close in nature to the address given by Garoon when buying the phone.
There were other references made, a reference to a baby girl being born. That was around the same time that Graham Dwyer's wife, Gemma, gave birth to their second child, a daughter. There were little reference to this, pay cuts, for example. The Gardaí investigated and realised that Graham Dwyer had been subject to some pay cuts at the architecture firm where he worked. He mentioned the expense of getting a car fixed. Cars and expensive cars were another hobby of his, and lo and behold, after some inquiries were made, Graham Dwyer did have some car trouble, and that had been quite an expensive fix for him. So all of these small, little, what he would have maybe felt were insignificant references made during the course of these conversations that heralded thousands of text message exchanges, these actually proved to be real nuggets of information for the investigation team, because ultimately they led them to lift the mask of this mystery man. They led them to the door of Graham Dwyer.
Thought he was good with computers, but turned out the police were better.
His attitude was, "You've nothing on me, I've got away with this, give me all you can."
Everything he had done throughout the previous years was building up towards this one event.
Then the doubt started to come in that he probably wasn't going to be convicted of murder, that there wasn't enough evidence.
Coming up tomorrow on CBS Reality, prepare yourself for the chilling conclusion to the most bizarre and disturbing murder case to hit Ireland in recent years. It's the final episode of CBS Reality, Secrets of a Psychopath at 10. Next, though, a true crime journalist revisits the case of a brutal contract killing in Donal McIntyre's Murder Files.